The rain over New York falls like a slow confession. It is the early 1900s. Carriages rattle over wet cobblestones. Gas lamps burn through the mist like lonely stars dragged down to street level. And in a tall office building of stone and iron, a thin man with a sharp nose and watchful eyes closes a ledger, lays down his pen, and stares out the window at a city he has quietly, methodically reshaped. John D. Rockefeller. Below him, the streets pulse with the life of a booming nation, vendors shouting, factory whistles screaming, steam rising from grates like ghosts of coal and sweat. Above him, the future hums, refineries out west, pipelines threading through fields, tankers cutting across oceans. Somewhere a church bell tolls. Somewhere a worker wipes oil from his hands and counts his pay. Somewhere a politician signs a law whose language was whispered first in private rooms. In this moment, the old world of lamps and horses is dying. A new world, lit by kerosene and powered by gasoline, is being born. And at the center of this transformation stands a family whose fingers touch oil, railroads, banks, universities, medicine, politics, even the dreams of ordinary Americans who will never know their names except as a symbol, the Rockefellers. But power once gathered casts long shadows. Behind the carefully controlled smiles in family portraits, there are bruised rivals, broken trusts, ruined towns, and fortunes made on risk that bordered on ruthlessness. There are prayers whispered by a devout Baptist boy becoming strategies whispered by an incomparable businessman. There are investigations, headlines screaming monopoly, and a Supreme Court decision that will shatter an empire, but not its influence. In the echo of each coin piled in their vaults, you can hear something larger, the sound of America learning how far it is willing to go in the pursuit of greatness, and what it is willing to sacrifice. This is not just the story of a rich family. It is the story of how oil shaped an empire, how philanthropy polished a name written in controversy, how one dynasty became an invisible partner in the making of modern capitalism itself. Stay close, listen carefully. In the glow of the first kerosene lamp to the gleam of Wall Street towers, the Rockefellers are there, quiet, calculating, and unshakably certain that they are instruments of a larger purpose. And as we step into their world, we're forced to ask, did they build America? Or did they bend it? If you find yourself drawn into this kind of deep, cinematic journey through history's hidden power, you're welcome to join us. One quiet tap to like and subscribe is enough to keep traveling further into the stories behind the empires that shaped our world. The making of a titan. The boy walks quickly, as if time itself is chasing him. It is a gray Cleveland morning in the late 1850s. The streets are wet with last night's rain, soft mud sucking at his boots. Smoke from chimneys hangs low over the town, mixing with the sour smell of coal and horses. John Davison Rockefeller, thin and serious-faced, clutches a worn ledger under his arm as he heads toward the office where he works as a clerk. He is not yet a titan, he is 17. Around him, life is noisy and uncertain. Wagons creak by, wheels grinding over stones. A vendor lifts his voice above the clatter, shouting about fresh bread. Somewhere a church bell rings the hour and John quickens his pace. He hates to be late. Lateness is disorder. Disorder is waste. Waste is sin. He has known chaos in a much more personal way. His father, William Big Bill Rockefeller, is a traveling salesman, a showman who sells fake cures and vanishes for long stretches. He tells jokes, makes promises, lives in the bright, shifting world of schemes and stories. Sometimes he comes home with pockets full of cash. Sometimes he doesn't come home at all. He is, as neighbors whisper, shifty. The children learn not to count on him. His mother, Eliza, is the opposite, small, devout, firm. She prays over her children, teaches them thrift, discipline, and fear of debt. She keeps a tight household, stretching every coin, saving every scrap. Control yourself, she tells John. Save when others spend. Work when others play. God helps those who help themselves. Her voice is soft, but her will is iron. From this strange mix, a father of restless tricks and a mother of rigid discipline, John learns two things. The world is not safe, and the only real protection is control. Inside the office, the smell changes. Ink, paper, dust, the quiet scratching of pens. John settles behind a wooden desk, opens his ledger, and begins to write. Columns of numbers march across the page under his hand, neat, straight, perfect. Debits on one side, credits on the other. Every cent has a place. Every transaction has a purpose. He loves it. There is a calm that falls over him when the world becomes lines and figures. Money, in a ledger, is no longer wild or frightened. It obeys rules. It can be counted, measured, directed. He later calls this job the School of Business, and in a way it is his first laboratory. Here he learns that behind every fortune and every failure there is a pattern, a system. At lunch, when the other clerks joke and drift to the window, John sometimes stands apart, watching, listening. He hears them talk about parties, about girls, about small pleasures. He nods, smiles politely, but his mind is somewhere else, on the numbers, on the future, on the invisible machine of trade that he is just starting to understand. In his pocket he carries a small notebook. In it he records every cent he spends, a nickel for a meal, a few pennies for a ride. He writes them down as if he is accounting not only for money but for his own soul. Save and invest, he reminds himself. Never waste. He is still a teenager, yet he whispers to a friend one day, half shy, half proud, "I mean to be rich." Outside, the world is changing faster than most people can follow. America is stretching westward. Railroads are biting into the countryside. New towns sprout up along the tracks like weeds after rain. And deep under rock and soil in Pennsylvania, drill bits are beginning to bite into something black and slippery and full of potential: oil. At first it is chaos. Wells are drilled almost at random. Boom towns appear overnight, rows of rough shacks, muddy streets, saloons glowing late into the night. The air smells of crude and sweat and spilled liquor. Men shout, gamble, fight. Fortunes are made and lost in weeks. Barrels stand in muddy yards leaking. Prices swing wildly as new wells strike or run dry. To most, this looks like a wild gamble, a fever dream. To John D. Rockefeller, watching from Cleveland, it looks like something else entirely. It looks like disorder that can be tamed. He studies the young oil trade the way he once studied ledgers. He reads reports, asks questions, examines freight costs, storage costs, refining costs. He sees waste everywhere, barrels poorly sealed, oil flared off in useless flames, refineries built in haste then abandoned, men who rush in with excitement and rush out with ruin. It offends him almost morally. Waste is an insult not just to business but to the God of order he believes in. In 1859, as news of the first great oil strike spreads, John is still in the world of grain and commission houses. But the shadows of derricks and refineries are beginning to stretch toward him. You can almost imagine him at his desk in the twilight, the last light slanting across his papers, his pen pausing as he considers this volatile new industry. What if, he might think, this could be organized? He is not loud, not theatrical. People who meet him describe him as calm, restrained, almost shy. There is nothing of the wild speculator in his manner. His power is in silence, in steady gaze, in the way he listens more than he speaks. When he does speak, it is with simple phrases. We must proceed carefully. We must reduce costs. We must limit risk. Beneath that simplicity, however, is a fierce ambition sharpened by early insecurity. He has seen poverty close up. He has watched his mother count coins at the kitchen table, worry in her eyes. The thought of falling backward into that life terrifies him. Wealth, for him, is not only comfort. It is safety. It is proof that he has mastered a dangerous world. In church, he hears sermons about stewardship, about using gifts wisely. He begins to see no contradiction between his growing hunger for success and his piety. If he can bring order to chaos, if he can build something stable out of the madness of the oil fields, perhaps he is not only enriching himself, but serving a higher purpose. One evening years later he will say quietly, "God gave me my money." For some, that sentence will sound arrogant. For him, it is simply the logic of his life. But before God, before destiny, there is a young man in Cleveland, staring at a new map of opportunity and making a decision that will change not just his life, but the life of a nation. He will move into oil. And when he does, he will not step in like a gambler tossing dice on a table. He will enter like an engineer approaching a broken machine, with patience, calculation, and an unshakable belief that all this wildness can be made to obey. The question is not whether he will succeed. The question is how far he will go in the name of order and what, or who, will be crushed along the way. John enters the oil business with the quiet certainty of a man stepping into a room he has already measured. By the early 1860s, Cleveland is humming with new activity. Rail yards clang with incoming tank cars. The refineries, crude little structures of wood, iron kettles, smoke-belching chimneys, dot the outskirts like a chain of blackened beehives. The air smells constantly of sulfur, kerosene, heat. At night, orange flames flicker above the city as waste gas burns off. Into the sky. Many see chaos. John D. Rockefeller sees opportunity. He forms a partnership, Clark and Rockefeller, then buys out the Clarks with an icy firmness that surprises even his friends. A dispute over money erupts, rational and quiet but relentless, ending with Rockefeller controlling the firm. "It was the day," he later says with rare emotion, "I began to understand my own power." That power does not look like shouting or swagger. It looks like observation. He walks refinery floors silently, hands clasped behind his back, studying the men, the machinery, the smells. He kneels to examine spilled oil around barrels. He watches tank levels rise and fall, calculates output ratios in his head. Workers pause when he passes, not because he is loud, but because he is so absolutely still. His eyes miss nothing. He could see waste as if it glowed, one foreman later recalls. The refinery he builds is not the largest in Cleveland, but it is the most efficient. Every step of production, from receiving crude to sealing kerosene tins, is measured, refined, tightened. Nothing is too small for his attention. If a worker uses a broom inefficiently, Rockefeller notices. If a barrel leaks a quarter cup of oil, he recalculates barrel design. To him, every penny saved is another brick in the foundation of survival. Outside the refinery walls, the world is ripping itself apart. The Civil War turned cities into supply engines. Prices fluctuate like heartbeats under stress. Men leave factories for battlefields. The railroad network strains under military demand. And into this storm walks Rockefeller, calm as a man entering church. War forces discipline. It forces the kind of structure he already worships. He secures contracts carefully, invests cautiously, refuses risks that others embrace. When competitors boast of fortunes made overnight, Rockefeller shakes his head. "Success," he mutters, "comes from keeping costs down and watching details." Even in wartime, even as speculators feast on volatility, he refuses to gamble. But he does not stand still. He buys additional refinery properties, expands facilities, studies transportation rates with the intensity of a mathematician. He learns railroad men by name, understands their schedules, their constraints, their pricing weaknesses. He knows that profit in oil doesn't come only from refining. It comes from moving product faster, cheaper, more reliably than anyone else. He begins to understand leverage. A letter from this period, written by a railroad agent, captures a whisper of Rockefeller's emerging influence. Mr. Rockefeller is a man of quiet manner but formidable purpose. He requests little, but what he requests seems already decided. Meanwhile, tension builds inside the oil world itself. Boomtown refineries produce erratically, flooding markets one month and starving them the next. Prices whip back and forth. dollar for a barrel, $10 a barrel, 25 cents a barrel. Men with fortunes one season are bankrupt the next. Barges run aground, tank farms catch fire, speculators panic. In that whirlwind of instability, Rockefeller's calmness feels unnatural. Pennsylvania oil producers laugh at him at first. "You can't tame this business," they say. "Oil comes when it pleases. Refineries rise and fall with luck." But Rockefeller does not believe in luck. He believes in systems. He reaches out to Samuel Andrews, a gifted chemist with hands that smell perpetually of benzene. Andrews is brilliant, intuitive, able to coax more kerosene out of crude than anyone else in Cleveland. Where Rockefeller is order, Andrews is ingenuity. Together, they refine not only oil, but the very idea of a refinery, turning it from a chaotic oil-boiling shack into something resembling early industrial science. With Andrews' technical genius and Rockefeller's discipline, they form Rockefeller, Andrews, and Flagler. Henry Flagler, sharp-minded, well-connected, ambitious, brings the final element John needs: networks, railroads, finance, political contacts. The kind of doors Rockefeller himself never forces open, but quietly walks through once someone like Flagler unlocks them. The partnership feels fated, and with it, the first glimmer of a future empire appears. Still inside John is a tension that never leaves him, a memory of his father's unpredictable comings and goings, the chaos of unpaid bills, the sound of his mother crying quietly at night when money ran short. He does not speak of it, he buries it, but it shapes him. He must control this industry. He must stabilize it. He must bend it into order. He cannot bear a world where things happen randomly. Meanwhile, newspapers run stories of wells gushing crude so violently that entire crews are showered in black rain. Night skies glow from refinery fires. The ground trembles in oil towns where dozens of derricks creak in the wind. It feels like a frontier of endless energy, raw, wild, untamed. Rockefeller watches this madness and whispers the sentence that will define his legacy. This business is too important to be left to chance. He does not mean simply to compete. He means to organize. He means to bring the entire industry under a logic as precise as his ledgers. But men who set out to impose order on chaos often find that the first thing they must tame is other men. And those men will not go quietly. Because as Rockefeller's small empire grows steadily, efficiently, quietly, other refiners begin to feel a pressure at their backs. A shadow spreading across Cleveland. A competitor who wastes nothing, flinches at nothing, and seems to think 10 moves ahead. Some try to imitate him. Some whisper admiration. But others, proud men, reckless men, men who built refineries with their own blistered hands, begin to hate him. The story of John D. Rockefeller is no longer just about a young clerk rising through discipline and thrift. It is about power. And power, especially in a world fueled by oil, always demands more. Every flame in every refinery chimney flickers with the promise of a coming transformation. A new America is being born, one that will run not on horse and steam, but on kerosene and ambition. Rockefeller intends to shape that birth. The question is how far he will go, and how many rivals he will push aside, on the road to becoming the most feared and admired businessman in the nation. By the late 1860s, the outlines of John D. Rockefeller's destiny are beginning to show, not in bright, dramatic strokes, but in careful lines of ink and the silent expansion of his reach. Cleveland has changed. The rattling wagons and muddy lanes are still there, but now telegraph wires hum overhead and rail tracks cut sharper paths through the city. The oil business, once a wild rumor from Pennsylvania, is now a permanent smell in the air. You can taste it in the smoke, feel it on the wind. Inside Rockefeller's office, a different kind of weather rules. The room is spare, a desk, A few chairs, a cross on the wall, a Bible never far from reach. On his desk, ledgers stacked in strict order, letters tied with careful string, contracts laid out in a neat fan. In the corner, a clock ticks with mechanical patience. Time, like money, must not be wasted. Flagler stands at the window, watching trains roll into the yard. Andrews, ink-stained and impatient, paces with a set of refinery schematics in his hands. They are powerful men in their own rights now, but in this room, everything orbits the thin, composed figure of John D. Rockefeller. He listens as they speak of rising competition in Pittsburgh, of sudden price cuts from rival refiners, of new wells being drilled that may flood the market with crude again. They speak in urgent tones. He nods, fingers resting lightly on the edge of his ledger. Then in his calm, almost gentle voice he says, "We must bring order to this industry." It sounds less like a business plan and more like a verdict. He has already started to act on that belief. Quietly, he has been buying out weaker competitors in Cleveland, approaching refinery owners with offers that feel to them like fate knocking. Some are weary, worn down by price wars and unpredictable markets. Some are bitter but cornered. They tell stories later of how Rockefeller spoke, soft, unhurried, offering them a way out. "We can take your plan into our system," he would say. "You will be treated fairly, but this business cannot go on in its present reckless manner. For those who accept, there is relief. For those who refuse, there is a different future, a competitor who can refine cheaper, transport cheaper, insure cheaper, and endure longer." In meetings behind closed doors, some men slam fists on tables and curse him. Others stare down at their hands and wonder how long they can hold out. On the refinery floors that join Rockefeller's growing network, change is immediate. Waste is cut, processes are standardized, barrels are redesigned to be tighter, stronger. He insists on better, safer lamps for homes, telling his men that burned customers do not buy twice. Byproducts once thrown away, like lubricants and paraffin wax, are refined, packaged, sold. Where others saw only kerosene, Rockefeller sees a whole family of products waiting to be shaped. "We must use every part of the barrel," he tells Andrews one evening, as the smell of hot oil and iron hangs thick in the air. God does not like waste. His religious language is not for show. He gives generously to his church, writes checks quietly to charities, speaks often of duty and stewardship. On Sunday mornings, he bows his head with the congregation, a devout man in a simple pew. But on weekdays, he builds something that will make him one of the most feared figures in American business. The line between faith and ambition blurs. In 1868, the books of his firm tell a story few yet understand. Profits are growing. Market share in Cleveland is consolidating. He controls not only refineries but key transportation deals. Railroads, struggling to keep their lines filled, begin to see him as a preferred customer, one who can promise steady volumes and push others aside. There is a story, half fact, half legend, of a railroad man who, after negotiating with Rockefeller, shakes his head and mutters to a colleague, "That man has the patience of a saint and the grip of a steel trap." Yet if you asked ordinary Americans about him then, many would not know his name. They would know the smell of his kerosene, though, burning in their lamps at night. They would know the smoother light it gave compared to older oils, the cleaner flame, the way it made evening reading easier on tired eyes. In farmhouses and city tenements, in quiet kitchens and crowded boarding houses, the Rockefeller touch is already there, silent, invisible. In his private papers, he keeps a sentence underlined: "He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much." It is a biblical verse, but for him it is also a business law. He has been faithful in the least, in coins, in barrels, in small refineries. Now he is ready for much. The oil industry by 1870 is at war with itself. Overbuilt, overcrowded, overexcited. Prices crash, refineries sit idle, debt piles up. Men who believed they were on the brink of fortunes find themselves begging lenders for more time. In the noise and panic, one voice remains unnervingly calm. Rockefeller believes the industry cannot survive as a storm of competing islands. It must become a single continent. One winter evening, snow blowing against the window panes, he sits at his desk with a document in front of him. The lamps cast a warm glow over the paper. On it is a name that will soon thunder through headlines and courtrooms, sermons and political speeches. Standard Oil Company. Standard because he intends to set the standard, for quality, for price, for discipline. Oil because it is no longer just a commodity to him. It is the bloodstream of a new economic body he is helping to build. Company because he knows this cannot be a one-man show. It must be a structure, a system, a corporate machine that can stretch its limbs across states. He reads the charter slowly, line by line, measuring each phrase. Flagler stands nearby, hands behind his back, knowing they are at the threshold of something immense. Andrews sits with his arms crossed, already imagining the expanded refining capacity this new company will command. Rockefeller's hand hovers over the page. The pen he holds is not dramatic. It is a simple instrument. But with it, he is about to sign into existence an entity that will shape American capitalism for generations. Outside in the snow-dark streets of Cleveland, men huddle in doorways. Horses stamp their hooves. Factory whistles moan in the distance. No one out there knows that on an upper floor of a quiet building, a man is about to fuse dozens of separate ambitions, fears, and fortunes into a single, relentless force. He dips the pen into ink. The scratch of nib on paper is almost inaudible. Yet in that tiny sound lives a coming storm, for rivals, for politicians, for a nation that will soon have to decide how much power one corporation should hold. One ends here, at the moment intent becomes structure. When John D. Rockefeller steps fully out of the shadows of clerks' ledgers and small partnerships and into the bright, harsh light of empire building. The Standard Oil Company is born. And with its birth, the age of the small, independent refiner begins to die. From the moment the ink dries on the Standard Oil Charter, the ground under Cleveland seems to shift, not violently, not with noise or fanfare, but with the quiet, tectonic pressure of something vast beginning to move. The year is 1870. Snow still clings to the roofs. Smoke drifts low from factory chimneys. But beneath the familiar winter silence, the city is entering a new era, one shaped not by chance or chaos, but by design. Rockefeller wastes no time. Where other businessmen celebrate the founding of a company, he begins immediately to expand it. There are no grand speeches, no champagne toasts, no boasting, only action. Letters go out. Meetings are scheduled. Offers are made, calm, firm, inevitable. His first target is Cleveland itself. At the time, Cleveland is one of America's great refining centers. Nearly 30 refineries crowd the city, each with its own methods, costs, ambitions, and anxieties. Many are fragile, burdened by debt, damaged by fires, suffering from volatile crude prices. Some are run by tough, confident men. Others by dreamers who rode the first wave of oil excitement but are now drowning in its unpredictability. Rockefeller visits them all. He arrives in a plain black carriage, steps out with his usual quiet posture, and sits at their tables with ledgers open beside him. Owners expect a hard negotiator. What they find instead is worse. A negotiator who never raises his voice, never flinches, never shows anger. Just numbers. Just facts. Just a steady argument that resisting. He is futile. He says the refining business as it now stands cannot continue. The reckless competition will ruin us all. Join us, and you will be treated fairly. Refuse, and you will face the consequences of an overcrowded market. For some, the message is a relief, an escape from a losing battle. For others, it feels like a velvet noose. Later, one refinery owner describes the experience. He spoke softly, but it felt like standing in front of a great machine already in motion. And that machine is just beginning. Within months, Standard Oil absorbs refinery after refinery. Some buyouts are peaceful, the trembling handshake of a tired man glad to be done. Others take longer, men pacing, swearing, wondering whether to gamble their futures against a man who seems never to lose. But one by one they fall. By the end of the year, Rockefeller controls nearly 90% of Cleveland's refining capacity. The local newspapers begin to whisper. Railmen murmur at taverns about that Rockefeller fellow who negotiates with the precision of a banker and the patience of a monk. Competitors in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia send nervous letters to their partners. Standard is growing. Watch them. Inside Rockefeller's headquarters, the atmosphere is almost serene. Clerks work in disciplined silence. Ledgers are kept immaculate. Mail arrives in bundles tied with string. Each letter is opened, sorted, filed with absolute precision. Rockefeller glides through the office, greeting employees by name, asking quiet questions, taking notes in his soft leather notebook. He is the eye of the storm, calm, focused, relentless. But if Cleveland is the first act, the railroads become the second. Transportation is the lifeblood of the oil business. Barges are slow, wagons are impractical, pipelines are still crude and unreliable. Railroads, fast, direct, adaptable, are the key to dominance. Rockefeller studies freight rates with almost religious discipline. He learns which lines struggle to fill cars, which managers need steady shipments, which routes bottleneck under wartime wear. He knows the pressure points before he ever sits down to negotiate. And when he does negotiate, he does so with a clarity that stuns railroad executives. "We can guarantee you large, consistent volumes," he tells them, "if you grant us favorable terms." Favorable terms, lower rates, rebates, the beginning of secret deals that will haunt the industry for decades. Some railroads balk at first. They see a young man in a quiet suit, serious, economical, plain. But then they see the volume charts, the growth trajectory, the network of refineries that feed his pipelines of commerce. He does not plead for better prices. He makes them feel inevitable. One rail executive later confides to a friend, "We did not decide to give Standard Oil rebates. We realized we could not afford not to." With preferential rates locked in, Rockefeller's advantage becomes overwhelming. His kerosene travels cheaper. His competitors are squeezed. Every mile of track becomes a lever in his grasp. Every barrel moved widens the gap. Meanwhile, inside the refineries, efficiency becomes something almost holy. No detail is too small. Every valve is inspected. Every barrel is weighed. Every waste stream is re-examined for hidden profit. Rockefeller is not content with simply making kerosene. He wants every usable product refined, packaged, and sold. Paraffin for candles, lubricants for machinery, gasoline, still mostly unwanted, but stored carefully for the future. Workers speak of him with a mix of awe and fear. "Mr. Rockefeller knows how much oil we spill just by looking at the floor," one says. "He counts everything," says another, "even the drops we don't see." But workers also notice something else. He is fair. He pays on time. He keeps his word. He funds safety improvements before other owners even consider them. In an era when industrial accidents are common and worker welfare often ignored, Standard Oil feels strangely orderly, almost stable. And yet outside those walls, resentment grows. Small refiners meet in smoky rooms, whispering about this new giant in Cleveland. Newspapers begin to ask questions. Local businessmen trade rumors that Rockefeller plans to control not just Cleveland, but Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, maybe the entire nation's kerosene supply. One rival, red-faced with anger, shouts in a tavern, "He wants to run us all out of business, every one of us. He won't stop until he owns the whole damn trade." He is not entirely wrong. Rockefeller does intend to bring the whole industry under one umbrella. Not out of malice, he insists privately, but out of necessity. Without consolidation, he believes, the oil business will collapse under its own chaos. He sees himself as a stabilizer, a steward, a man saving an industry from self-destruction. But others see something far simpler: a monopoly rising. By the winter of 1871, the air around Cleveland is thick not just with smoke, but with suspicion. Competitors watch shipments with narrowed eyes. Railmen speak more cautiously. Rumors swirl of a new agreement, secret, enormous, dangerous. A deal that, if true, could give Rockefeller influence far beyond Cleveland. A deal that would soon provoke one of the greatest controversies in industrial history. And as one draws to a close, Rockefeller stands at the edge of that moment, calm, certain, seeing farther into the future than anyone around him. The boy with the ledger has become a man with a vision. But visions, once they start to shape the world, always meet resistance. And in the shadows of railroad yards and refinery streets, that resistance is already gathering. Standard Oil and the machinery of monopoly. The tracks glisten in the winter light, twin lines of steel cutting through the snow like a promise. It is early 1872. In the rail yards, men in heavy coats move between cars, their breath steaming in the cold. Locomotives hiss and rumble, iron lungs pumping as they prepare to haul tank cars and freight across a restless nation. Somewhere in a small railroad office, a clerk seals an envelope bearing the imprint of a name few yet know well: South Improvement Company. On paper, it is just another corporate arrangement, an agreement between railroads and a select group of refiners to improve the industry. But inside its clauses lives a new kind of power: freight rebates, drawbacks on competitors' shipments, confidential rate structures, a hidden skeleton on which an empire can hang its flesh. Behind that paper, shaping its terms, stands John D. Rockefeller. He has spent years studying the weaknesses of the oil trade, its volatility, its overcrowding, its desperation. Now, through the South Improvement Company, he intends to solve them all at once: consolidate refining, control transportation, dictate prices. No more wild booms and crushing busts. No more speculative chaos. At least, that is how he explains it to himself. In private conversations with allies, he speaks of stability, efficiency, the good of the industry. But the mechanics of the agreement are brutal. Standard Oil and a small circle of favored refiners will receive secret rebates from the railroads, money back on every barrel they ship. More than that, they will receive drawbacks, a portion of the freight paid by their competitors. Every time a rival ships a barrel, a sliver of the cost will flow quietly into Rockefeller's pocket. It is a financial weapon disguised as a business contract. In Cleveland, in Pittsburgh, in Philadelphia, when the details begin to leak, the reaction is explosive. Producers, refiners, and independent shippers gather in crowded halls, faces flushed with anger, fists pounding wooden tables. Voices rise over the smoky air as someone reads aloud the rumored terms of the South Improvement Company deal. "They will ruin us," one man shouts. "Every barrel we move will be paying tribute to Standard." Another, trembling with fury, slams his hat onto the floor. This is robbery with a pen instead of a pistol. The telegraph wires buzz. Newspapers catch the scent of scandal and sharpen their headlines. Monopoly in oil. Secret combination between railroads and refiners. Public sentiment, already uneasy about corporate power, flares into outrage. Meetings turn into protests. Producers march. Committees are formed. Politicians, sensing the direction of the wind, begin to speak against the arrangement. The South Improvement Company becomes a symbol of everything Americans fear about concentrated power: deals made in hidden rooms, fortunes secured by quiet signatures rather than open competition. Rockefeller watches all of this with cold, measured eyes. He has calculated, as always. He knows the agreement will provoke resistance. He knows it may be attacked. But while the shouting continues in Pennsylvania oil towns, he focuses on something else: speed. If he can move quickly enough while others are still organizing their anger, if he can use the mere threat of the South Improvement Company, even if it is later dismantled, he can complete what history will call the Cleveland Massacre. He moves. Standard Oil agents fan out across the city again, knocking on the doors of independent refiners. This time, the conversation carries a new tone: urgency, inevitability, a sense that the old world is ending. One owner, face pale, listens as a Standard representative lays out the facts. Rates are changing. The South Improvement Company agreement will tilt the playing field. Standard, with its rebates and scale, will refine cheaper, ship cheaper, survive longer. "You can join us," the agent says softly, "and receive fair compensation, or you can stay and face what is coming." Some owners rage. "This is blackmail," they cry. Others stare at the floor, thinking of debts, families, worn-out machinery. In Rockefeller's office, reports arrive daily. Agreed to sell. Negotiating terms. Refuses for now. To each. Rockefeller responds with the same unshaken logic. Those who sell are brought into the Standard system, their plants either improved and integrated or dismantled if redundant. Those who refuse face a market in which every advantage leans toward Standard: better rail rates, more reliable crude supplies, better credit terms with banks impressed by steady profits. The South Improvement Company, battered by public outrage, soon collapses under political pressure. State legislatures move. Congress sniffs danger. The agreement is revoked before it fully takes effect. But for Rockefeller, its purpose has already been largely served. The fear it created was real. The consolidation it accelerated is permanent. By the time the storm dies down, Standard Oil's hold on Cleveland is nearly total. The Cleveland Massacre, as rivals bitterly call it, is not a massacre of blood but of independence. One refinery after another absorbed, neutralized, or crushed. The skyline of smokestacks remains, but the names behind them are changing. Where once there were dozens of owners, now there is one dominant power. Inside Standard Oil's growing headquarters, the atmosphere shifts again, from expansion to coordination. This is no longer merely a company. It is beginning to feel like a machine. Departments form, each with clear roles: purchasing, refining, transportation, export, legal, accounting. Information flows through this structure like crude through a pipeline. Rockefeller presides from the center, but not as a flamboyant commander, more like an engineer in a control room, turning dials, monitoring pressure, making constant small corrections. He insists on regular reports, uniform accounting, precise statistics. How many barrels refined this week? At what cost per gallon? How many leaks? How many accidents? Which railroad delivered on time? Which warehouse lost product? Every figure is a story. Every story suggests a change. Efficiency, once a personal obsession, is now institutionalized. At the refineries, production lines run with increasingly smooth rhythm. Workers come to understand that Standard has eyes everywhere, not in the sense of spies, but in the sense that performance is measured. If a process wastes fuel, someone will notice. If a worker improves output, someone will notice that too. Meanwhile, beyond Cleveland, Standard begins to reach outward. Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore. Each city has its own cluster of refineries, its own local alliances, its own proud men who believe they cannot be easily swept aside. But Standard arrives not as a raider with banners, but as a buyer with ledgers. Sometimes it offers partnership, sometimes purchase, sometimes quiet pressure applied through railroads and banks. The method changes with circumstance. The goal never does. Bring the industry under one system. Reduce duplication. Dominate. From the outside, for those who read only the headlines, it looks like greed without end. From the inside, for Rockefeller and his inner circle, it feels like destiny fulfilled. The oil business, he tells an associate one day as they stand over a map crowded with pins, must have a head. Without it, we destroy ourselves. We are simply assuming the responsibility no one else has the courage to take. Responsibility. It is a word that sounds noble, heavy with moral weight. But in the echo of that word, another can be heard, whispered by competitors, journalists, and eventually judges. Monopoly. Standard Oil, this smoothly humming, quietly expanding organism, is becoming, in the eyes of many, the very embodiment of it. And as the machine grows, the human cost of its movement begins to show in the stories of those it leaves behind. A shuttered refinery here. A ruined family business there. A once proud owner sitting in a dim parlor, staring at a buyout check that feels less like a victory and more like an obituary. The machinery of monopoly runs on oil, yes, but it also runs on broken rivals. And in the distance, beyond the glow of refinery fires and the rush of tank cars, a new force is beginning to stir. Public opinion, armed with pens and printing presses, waiting for someone to show it how this great machine truly works. The train whistles in the distance sound different now, sharper, more insistent, as if echoing a new reality unfolding across the American landscape. By the mid-1870s, Standard Oil is no longer simply a powerful company. It is becoming a presence, something large enough that men in distant cities speak of it with a mixture of awe and unease. Its reach stretches across state lines, its influence felt in refinery towns, in railroad offices, in the quiet inner chambers of banks where loans are approved or denied with an eye on who stands behind the application. And at the center of it all, John D. Rockefeller moves with the same unhurried calm that marked his earliest steps in the business. Yet around him, the world begins to tremble. Standard Oil's growth has a gravitational pull. Wherever it expands, the ground shifts, drawing resources, talent, capital, and even political attention toward Cleveland. Towns feel it when shipments reroute. Banks feel it when smaller refiners request extension after extension. Workers feel it when their employers, once confident, gather them for somber meetings. In one such refinery, owned by a man named Nathaniel Parker, a cloud of smoke hangs low as workers gather around their employer. His face is lined with fatigue. "They're offering to buy us," he says quietly, "Standard Oil." A murmur moves through the crowd. Some cross their arms defiantly, others stare at the floor. One worker, Samuel Green, wipes sweat from his brow. "If we sell, do we keep our jobs?" Parker hesitates. In that hesitation lies the entire tragedy of the era. Some will keep their jobs, absorbed into the standard system, where their labor becomes part of a refined, efficient operation. Others will not. Some plants will be integrated. Others will be shuttered. Standard doesn't waste resources. It doesn't carry redundancies. It is a machine after all, and machines optimize. The workers nod slowly, understanding. That night many gather in saloons, the smell of beer mixing with the bitter smell of crude oil soaked into their clothes. They argue, whisper, curse, wonder. But they know one truth: the world that gave birth to independent refiners is ending. Inside Standard Oil, the view is very different. Its Cleveland headquarters expands, larger offices, more clerks, thicker stacks of paperwork. The company now tracks shipments from Pennsylvania wells to New York docks with stunning precision. Ledgers fill with data, Cost per barrel, freight per mile, yield per crude type. On the wall of Rockefeller's office hangs a large map of the northeastern United States with pins marking every refinery, every transport hub, every strategic choke point. At morning meetings, Rockefeller sits at the head of a long table. Andrews spreads technical reports before him, new distillation methods, improved condenser designs, ways to reduce losses. Flagler lays down transportation contracts, his tone always level but his eyes alive with ambition. Other executives bring updates from the field, refinery acquisitions, supply conditions, railroad negotiations. Rockefeller listens, always listens. Then in his soft voice, he offers direction. Send a team to inspect that refinery in Oil City. Negotiate better terms with the Lakeshore Line. Improve the paraffin process before winter. Cut costs, always cut costs. His sentences are short, but they carry the weight of inevitability. What makes Rockefeller so formidable is not rage or theatrics. It is his unshakable certainty, his belief that he is building something rational and necessary, something that brings order to an industry he views as dangerously disordered. But not everyone agrees. In the oil regions of Pennsylvania, anger simmers like crude in a hot still. Producers complain bitterly that Standard's growing power forces them to accept lower prices for their crude. They gather in barns, in schoolhouses, in makeshift union halls, slamming fists on tables and shouting over milling crowds. They set the prices now. They dictate terms to the railroads. We used to choose where to send our oil. Now we have one buyer, and he knows it. Telegraph operators relay these complaints across the state. Newspaper editors sense a story that sells, the tale of small men being swallowed by a giant. Rumors swirl. Standard is bribing officials. Standard is crushing competition. Standard is plotting something even larger. And in a way, they are right. By 1874, Rockefeller's ambition expands again, not just horizontally, absorbing refiners, but vertically, controlling the entire chain from the wellhead to the lamp. He invests in cooperage works, factories that produce barrels. He buys sulfuric acid plants, essential for refining. He secures ownership in tank car manufacturers. He negotiates exclusive deals with warehouses. He moves into export markets, Europe, Asia, South America. Each acquisition seems small on its own, a practical choice, but together they form something unprecedented. A corporation that controls every major step of the oil industry. Crude sourcing, refining, transport, distribution, export, retail. Nothing is left vulnerable. Nothing exists outside the system. Standard Oil becomes a world unto itself. And those who live outside that world begin to feel as though they are sinking. Then comes a moment that crystallizes the era, a hearing in Pennsylvania, where angry producers gather to confront railroad executives. The hall is packed with men in worn coats, their faces set with grim determination. Outside, snow falls softly, muffling the sound of horses and wagons. Inside, the producer spokesman shouts across the room. Are you giving secret rebates to Standard Oil? The railroad executive hesitates, sweats, shifts in his chair. We have certain arrangements. Answer plainly, someone roars. Chairs scrape, men surge forward, voices rise like a storm. Eventually the executive, surrounded, overwhelmed, admits the truth. Yes, rebates exist. Drawbacks exist. Standard Oil pays less and earns more on every barrel shipped. The room erupts. It is the closest thing to a riot the oil region has ever seen. Telegraph wires hum with the news. Standard Oil exposed, scream headlines from Pittsburgh to New York. Reformers rally, editors sharpen their pens. Competitors, though frightened, feel a flicker of hope, Exposure may be the only thing that can slow Rockefeller's advance. But Standard Oil moves faster than its enemies. Behind closed doors in Cleveland, Rockefeller sits with his executives and examines the fallout. His fingers tap lightly on the table. "This is noise," he says calmly. "Noise does not change facts." He lays out his reasoning with chilling clarity. "The industry is weaker without us. Crude prices would collapse, refiners would fail, railroads would falter. We are stabilizing the trade. If they object, let them object, but we will continue." He does not say it with arrogance. He says it with certainty. And certainty, in the hands of a man with such reach, becomes power in its purest form. Outside Standard's boardroom, the nation begins to realize something. Standard Oil is not simply participating in the oil business. It is reshaping it. Reshaping the rules. Reshaping the flows of money and resources. Reshaping the futures of towns, families, and entire regions. This is the machinery of monopoly, not loud or chaotic, but smooth, quiet, and relentless. And somewhere in that machinery, a young woman named Ida Tarbell, still a child in these years, watches her father's refinery collapse under Standard's pressure. She will remember the bitterness in her father's voice. She will remember the fear in her mother's eyes. One day, decades later, she will sharpen her pen with those memories. And she will turn her quiet rage into the most devastating journalistic assault of her era. But for now, Standard's rise continues, uninterrupted. The protests grow louder. The editorials grow harsher. The political murmurs grow restless. Yet Standard Oil keeps expanding, its pipelines lengthening, its refineries multiplying, its market share rising like a tide that refuses to retreat. Something dark and unstoppable is forming. A giant. And in its shadow, America begins to wonder whether anything can stand against it. Standard Oil's empire does not rise with drums and banners, but with paperwork. By the late 1870s and into the 1880s, the heart of that empire beats not only in Cleveland's refineries, but in quiet offices where pens scrape over contracts and men bend over long tables lit by gas lamps. Here, power is not a shout, it is a signature. The company grows so large, so sprawling, that its old corporate forms begin to creak under the weight. Dozens of subsidiary companies, properties in several states, ships, warehouses, buying agencies, export houses. If you laid out the ownership structure on a table, it would look like a spider's web, threads crossing state lines, looping through other corporations, tied to names that do not always say Standard, but answer to it all the same. Rockefeller needs a new structure. The answer, born in legal minds and polished in boardrooms, is as cold and elegant as a blade: the Standard Oil Trust. Under this arrangement, stockholders in numerous companies hand their shares to a small group of trustees, Rockefeller among them, in exchange for trust certificates. Control is centralized. Decisions are unified. The separate companies become, in practice, one vast organism, even if they still wear different names on their doors. Trust. A gentle word. Behind it, a hard reality. A tiny circle of men now holds the reins of an industry that stretches from the wells of Pennsylvania and Ohio to the lamp shops of Europe and the docks of Asia. In New York, where Standard now plants a major headquarters, the mood inside its offices feels almost monastic. Sparse decoration, careful manners, men in dark suits moving with purpose along hallways, papers tucked under their arms. A visitor might expect displays of wealth, but Rockefeller detests ostentation. Waste, he would say, is sin, whether in money or in pride. He rides to work not in a showy carriage, but in a modest one. He dresses simply. He eats plain food. He lives like a man under constant self-discipline. And yet from his desk, lines of influence radiate in all directions. Tank cars bearing Standard markings rumble across rail lines. Tankers with Standard cargoes cross the Atlantic. Agents in foreign ports negotiate kerosene contracts in halting French, German, Chinese. In some villages, people who have never heard the name Rockefeller still light their homes with lamps fueled by his refineries. One British merchant writes home after visit. In America's oil regions, the power of this Standard Oil is unlike anything in our trade. One has the sense of dealing not with a company, but with a law of nature. That is exactly how some Americans begin to feel as well. Farmers and shopkeepers, reading their newspapers by kerosene light, see cartoonists sketching a new monster, an octopus with the words Standard Oil printed on its head, long tentacles curling around railroads, Capitol domes, ocean steamers. In one cartoon, the creature reaches even for the White House. The idea is clear. Standard Oil is everywhere. And when something is everywhere, it begins to feel inevitable and dangerous. Politicians, who once saw the oil business as just another industry, can no longer ignore it. State legislatures debate bills to control railroad rebates, to limit corporate combinations, to force transparency. Lawyers argue over the meaning of restraint of trade in dusty courtrooms as jurors frown and judges stroke their chins. Standard, for its part, hires excellent lawyers. They argue that combination is efficiency. That scale brings lower prices. That consumers benefit from cheaper, higher quality kerosene. And there is truth in that. Under Standard's dominance, kerosene prices do fall. The lamps of ordinary Americans burn more steadily and cost less to fuel. But critics ask a different question. At what cost was that efficiency achieved? And what will happen when the giant decides it no longer needs to be generous? These questions hang in the air like smoke from a refinery stack, always there, sometimes ignored, never truly gone. Inside Rockefeller's circle, the mood is one of wary confidence. They know they are watched, they know they are resented, but they believe with a conviction that borders on faith that history will vindicate them. They see themselves as organizers of chaos, not villains, as builders, not destroyers. I do not think the public understands, Rockefeller tells a close associate one evening, his voice low, his hands folded. They see power and fear it. They do not see the waste we have prevented, the ruin we have averted. Perhaps he is sincere, perhaps he is comforting himself, perhaps both are true. Meanwhile, far from the boardrooms, in a modest house in Pennsylvania, a young woman sits at a table, watching her father's face harden as he speaks of Standard Oil. Ida Tarbell listens as he recounts how refineries like his were squeezed out, how rates changed unexpectedly, how markets shifted, how a sense of inevitability settled over independent refiners like a fog. They did not just compete, he tells her bitterly. They took hold of the whole business. There was no dealing with them as equals. We were at their mercy. She remembers his words. She stores them away like embers. One day, she will fan those embers into flame. For now, the flame is only beginning. A pamphlet here, a speech there, a court case in one state, a regulatory effort in another. Individually, they look small next to the towering mass of Standard Oil. But taken together, they are something more. They are the first hairline cracks in the shell of a giant. Rockefeller cannot yet hear the full cracking. He hears only a faint, distant sound, newspapers muttering, legislators pushing back, lawyers raising more pointed questions. He believes his structure can withstand it. After all, it was built with care, discipline, and the belief that scale itself is a kind of righteousness. But history has its own logic. No matter how quietly a giant walks, its footsteps leave marks. No matter how delicately power is handled, it invites scrutiny. No matter how efficiently a monopoly serves the market, it raises a simple, dangerous thought in the minds of citizens. If they can do this in oil, what else might they control? And as that thought spreads, rolling from town to town on trains that still carry Standard's barrels. The stage is being set for a confrontation that will change both the company and the country. The machinery of monopoly has reached its greatest strength. Soon, it will meet something even stronger, a nation's decision about what kind of power it is willing to tolerate. The fall of the giant, law, public rage, and the breakup. In the quiet hours before dawn, a single lamp glows in an upstairs window of a modest home in Washington, Pennsylvania. Inside, a young woman bends over her desk, her pen whispering across paper with a determination that cuts sharper than any blade. Ida Tarbell. Her hair is tied back, her expression fixed. Around her, stacks of documents rise like the walls of a small fortress, notes from interviews, letters from disgruntled refiners, railroad records smuggled out of offices by men who could no longer bear the secrecy. Her father's old refinery ledger, its ink faded, sits at the corner of the desk, a ghost of the life Standard Oil had crushed. She dips her pen again. The history of the Standard Oil Company, she writes, beginning. The work that will shake one of the most powerful empires in American history. Outside, the cold night air holds a stillness that feels expectant, as if the nation itself is holding its breath. Because for decades, the story of Standard Oil has been whispered in alleys, muttered in saloons, debated in courtrooms, but never fully told. Ida Tarbell intends to tell it. And she will not whisper. Even before Ida's investigation reaches the public, the ground beneath Standard Oil has begun to shift. The company remains enormous, its refineries blaze, its tank cars rumble across rails, its empire stretches from Ohio to New York to the coasts. But a new mood is rising in America, a mood that distrusts giants. Small farmers feel it when grain rates rise while oil rates mysteriously fall. Merchants feel it when kerosene prices fluctuate in ways they cannot explain. Politicians feel it as constituents arrive red-faced and demanding answers. The word trust no longer sounds harmonious or efficient. It sounds ominous. In state capitals, lawmakers begin proposing measures to control combinations of corporations. Editors sharpen their pens. Preachers speak in sermons of fairness, equality, the danger of unchecked wealth. And on the floor of Congress, the first murmurs arise about antitrust laws. The age of unrestrained industrial expansion is meeting its first national resistance. Rockefeller notices. He reads newspapers carefully, every editorial, every accusation, every rumor. He sees his name invoked as a warning, a metaphor for the dark side of capitalism. Sometimes he smiles faintly, brushing off the attacks as misunderstandings. Other times he sits still for long minutes, the paper folded in his hands, his thoughts hidden even from those closest to him. Public sentiment is changeable, he murmurs, but efficiency endures. Yet public sentiment is no longer changeable. It is building. When Ida Tarbell's serialized exposé begins running in McClure's magazine in 1902, it lands with the force of a hammer. Crowds gather outside newsstands, coins already in hand. In barbershops and railway cars, men read aloud from the pages, voices rising with disbelief, anger, or grim satisfaction. Women read it by lamplight after their children sleep. Politicians clip the serialized S and store them in folders marked investigation. Ida's writing is meticulous, cool, surgical. She does not call Rockefeller evil. She does not rant. She simply shows what happened. She shows the small refiners squeezed until their accounts bled dry. The railroad deals hidden behind locked doors. The way the South Improvement Company's ghost still echoes in Standard's methods. The way fear traveled ahead of Standard's agents like a chilling wind. She recounts testimony, letters, contracts. She quotes the men whose businesses were shattered. She reconstructs meetings, hallway conversations, deals made quietly and ruthlessly. And because she writes without malice, her words land harder. The public reels. This is not just a business story. It is a human story. A story of ambition, domination, efficiency turned into coercion. A story of how one man's vision for order became, to others, a nightmare of control. Suddenly, the machinery of monopoly no longer seems invisible. It has a shape, a name, a face. John D. Rockefeller. Cartoons in national papers draw him as a spider in a web, as a crowned emperor, as an octopus wrapped around the Capitol. Ministers sermonize about him. Labor leaders condemn him. Reformers call for the government to act. And in quiet rooms, Rockefeller feels something new. Public rage. Pressure mounts from every direction. States file lawsuits. Railroads face inquiries. Competitors testify in packed courtrooms, their voices bitter but resolute. Investigators demand records. Journalists swarm. The word monopoly becomes a battle cry. Then, in 1890, Congress passes the Sherman Antitrust Act, a piece of legislation aimed at the very kind of corporate structure Rockefeller perfected. The law is vague, its language slippery, but its intent is clear. No single corporation should restrain trade. No trust should dominate an industry. To Standard Oil, the act is a threat, not of immediate punishment but of future weaponization. Rockefeller's lawyers study it closely. They reassure him. "We will adapt," they say. "The law is imprecise. It cannot undo efficiency. It cannot punish success." Rockefeller nods, but silently he marks the moment. The national mood has turned. The tide is shifting. Still, Standard Oil continues its operations. The machine never stops. It adjusts, evolves, finds new forms. When the government challenges one structure, Standard reorganizes. When it challenges again, Standard decentralizes. It is a corporation that flows around obstacles the way oil flows around stone. But one obstacle will not be bypassed: the United States government. In 1906, the case is filed. United States v. Standard Oil Co. O. F. New Jersey. The courtroom battles begin. The government arrives armed with truckloads of documents, witnesses ready to testify, and a national audience cheering from the sidelines. Lawyers recount the South Improvement Company. They describe railroad rebates. They map Standard's purchases of competitors. They detail price wars designed to crush rivals. They outline the trust structure meant to evade state laws. The narrative is powerful, almost theatrical, and behind it all looms Ida Tarbell's work, cited as both evidence and inspiration. Her pen has become a political force. Rockefeller himself avoids the courtroom, delegating to his executives and attorneys. He is older now, balder, quieter than ever. He spends more time in New York, more time in prayer, more time giving away money than earning it. But even in philanthropy, his name carries the shadow of Standard Oil. Years pass. Arguments accumulate like layers of sediment. Finally, in 1911, the Supreme Court issues its ruling, a verdict that echoes across the nation. Standard Oil is guilty of unreasonable restraint of trade. It must be broken apart. The giant must be shattered. And yet, as the ruling is read aloud in Washington, D.C., the atmosphere is strangely subdued. There is no explosion, no panic. Standard's executives do not scream or faint. Rockefeller does not weep. The breakup order is harsh, but it is not annihilation. It requires Standard to separate into dozens of independent companies, each with its own management, its own stock, its own operations. Standard Oil of New Jersey. Standard Oil of New York. Standard Oil of California. Standard Oil of Indiana. Standard Oil of Ohio. And many more. The pieces scatter across the map like iron filings pulled apart by a magnet. Crowds celebrate, Headlines cheer, politicians declare victory. The monopoly is broken. The giant has fallen. But has it? Because even as Standard Oil dissolves on paper, something else happens. Rockefeller's personal wealth doubles, then triples, then keeps climbing. Each of the broken pieces becomes a thriving corporation. Their stock rises, their reach expands. The children of Standard Oil become giants in their own right. Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, Conoco, Marathon, the oil-soaked branches of a tree whose roots are still sunk deep in America's soil. The empire is gone, but its legacy endures, stronger in some ways than before. And as this closes, the camera lingers on Rockefeller himself, sitting alone at his estate in the soft light of evening, the distant sounds of servants moving through the hallways like faded memories. The world has changed. His empire has changed. His reputation has changed. But the oil still flows. The refineries still roar. The companies still prosper. History has struck him, but it has not undone him. Not yet. The gavel falls and the courtroom empties, but the aftershocks ripple outward, slow and deep, like tremors following the collapse of a mountain. For the first time in decades, Standard Oil is no longer a single entity. It is a constellation, dozens of companies spinning outward, each carrying a shard of the old empire's DNA. Reporters swarm the streets, their notebooks clutched tight, headlines already forming in their minds. Monopoly shattered. Rockefeller defeated. Government tames the giant. But behind the noise, behind the celebrating politicians and the triumphant reformers, there is a quieter truth. Standard's fall is not a collapse. It is a metamorphosis. At 26 Broadway in New York City, Standard Oil's famous headquarters, employees gather uncertainly in the marble-floored lobby. Clerks whisper. Messengers clutch envelopes half addressed to subsidiaries that no longer officially exist. A young stenographer named Clara leans toward an older colleague. "What happens now?" she asks. The older man buttons his coat. He has worked for Standard for 20 years. "Now," he says quietly, "now the pieces grow. And grow they will." In boardrooms across the country, the newly separated companies, a Standard Oil of this, a Standard Oil of that, inherit territory, pipelines, tank cars, storage facilities, and customers. They are children of a titan, each with its father's discipline etched into its bones. The breakup order, meant to weaken the empire, instead becomes a kind of strange fertilizer. Freed from the legal restraints that bound them as one, the new companies begin to compete, innovate, and expand with renewed fury. Investors buy their stock eagerly. Bankers line up to extend credit. Foreign buyers, no longer wary of dealing with a monopoly, open their doors wider. And Rockefeller, though he has stepped back from day-to-day business, still owns a vast share of these new companies. When their stock prices rise, his fortunes rise. In a few years, he will become the richest man not only in America, but in recorded history. The irony is so sharp it feels like satire. The government broke Standard Oil to reduce Rockefeller's power, but in breaking it, they made him wealthier than any single man had ever been. Meanwhile, in the oil regions, the mood is complex. Some celebrate, believing justice has finally been served. Old refiners, long crushed by Standard's efficiency, raise glasses in dim saloons. "Maybe now," one says, voice rough with age, "men like us can breathe again." But others stare at the new landscape and feel uneasy. The smaller refineries remain gone. The smaller businesses remain gone. The patterns Rockefeller shaped into the industry, vertical integration, large-scale coordination, centralized decision-making, are still dominant. The giant has fallen, but the world it created still stands. Even the courts seem to understand this strange victory. In the official ruling, one justice writes, "The combination is dissolved, but the efficiency it introduced will likely persist." In other words, you can break a trust. You cannot break the world it remade. And somewhere in Pennsylvania, Ida Tarbell reads the headlines with a complex mixture of triumph and melancholy. Her father, now older and subdued, holds the newspaper gently. "You did it," he whispers. "You brought the story into daylight." Ida doesn't smile. "I told the truth," she says simply. "The country decided what to do with it." But privately, she knows the truth is layered. Rockefeller was not a villain in the simple sense. He was something more unsettling, an architect of systems, a man whose moral certainty carried both brilliance and harm. She writes in her notebook that evening, "What do we do with men who bring order by breaking others? What do we do with men whose vision is too large for the world to follow without consequence?" Questions that will outlive both her and Rockefeller. In Cleveland, far from the courtrooms and headlines, the old refineries that once shaped Rockefeller's early life stand silent. Some are shuttered ruins. Others, absorbed into successor companies, have been rebuilt with steel and modern machinery. The air smells the same, sulfur, metal, oil, but the spirit of the place has changed. No longer the chaotic frontier of the 1860s, it is now part of a vast, regulated industry. A young worker walks the floor of a modernized plant, clipboard in hand. He has never known a world where dozens of small refineries battled for survival. He has never feared a price war or prayed for stable freight rates. He steps over steel walkways and listens to the hum of turbines, unaware that everything he sees, every efficiency, every safety measure, every process, descends from the machine Rockefeller built. He stops for a moment and looks at the massive stills rising above him, pipes twisting like the branches of some mechanical tree. "They say Standard Oil was broken," he murmurs to a colleague. The colleague snorts, "Only on paper." In New York, on the veranda of his estate at Picantico Hills, Rockefeller watches the sun drift low over the Hudson River. He is an old man now, thin, pale, with a stooped posture and a voice softened by age. His hands, once steady as a ledger line, tremble slightly as he holds a cup of tea. He no longer manages the business. His heart belongs now to philanthropy, universities, research institutes, public health campaigns, charity missions. He gives money away faster than governments can spend it. Foundations bearing his name spread across continents. And yet, there is a shadow that follows him. A shadow shaped like smokestacks. A shadow shaped like tank cars. A shadow shaped like a trust. Visitors ask him about the court ruling. He replies gently, "Competition is good for business." Then he smiles faintly, a smile people struggle to interpret. Is it resignation? Wryness? Or the quiet satisfaction of a man who knows his influence has slipped into the bloodstream of the modern age, impossible to extract? Later, alone, he opens a Bible and runs a finger along the verse he has always kept close. "He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much." Did he remain faithful? Did he serve order and God as he believed? Did he build an empire for good, or unleash a force that bent the world around its own ambition? He does not answer. Perhaps he cannot. He closes the Bible, the faint click of its clasp echoing like the last tick of a clock. Behind him, the world he shaped continues to move, engines roaring, refineries burning, ships steaming across oceans, corporations born from the bones of Standard Oil rising into global giants. The giant has fallen, but the age of oil, the age he helped forge, has only begun. The wind moves gently through the tall grass at Picantico Hills, bending each blade as though bowing to the man who walks among them. His steps are slow now, measured by age rather than ambition. Though his spine is curved and his breath shortens on inclines, John D. Rockefeller walks the grounds each morning with a quiet ritual, tracing paths he once strode with the brisk certainty of a command. There. Now he walks as a witness to what he has built and what has been taken apart. And yet, everywhere he looks, hints of Standard Oil still glimmer. The electric lights in the estate's main house burn thanks to kerosene's successor. The automobiles that bring guests up the winding drive run on gasoline, a product once considered a useless byproduct of his refineries. The universities he funds, including the University of Chicago, train engineers and economists who study industries shaped by his methods. The medical laboratories he supports develop vaccines, treatments, and public health campaigns made possible by the wealth of his once maligned company. The tendrils of his influence, though officially severed, continue to curl across the nation. It is a strange legacy, broken and unbroken all at once. Beyond Picantico, the decades following the breakup reshape America in ways neither its citizens nor its lawmakers anticipated. In New York, Standard Oil of New Jersey, soon known as Jersey Standard, rises rapidly as one of the most formidable corporations in the world. In California, Standard Oil of California expands westward and into Asia. In the Midwest, Standard Oil of Indiana becomes a refining powerhouse. Standard Oil of New York evolves into what will one day be Mobil. Together, the fragments of the trust form a new industrial constellation. It is as if the giant once shattered has transformed into a pantheon of younger giants, each smaller, but more nimble and more dangerous in their own ways. A senator from Ohio remarks during a committee session, "We set out to weaken a monopoly. We may instead have given birth to an entire family of them." Consumers, meanwhile, enjoy cheaper kerosene still, now joined by gasoline being poured into the tanks of a rising new obsession, automobiles. Henry Ford's assembly lines hum. Roads expand. America becomes a nation not merely lit by oil but driven by it. The timing is uncanny. The very moment Rockefeller's trust is broken, the world's need for oil multiplies. The dizzying irony does not escape economists, nor does it escape foreign governments watching this transformation with fascination and concern. Germany, Britain, Russia, Japan, all begin examining their own oil strategies. Militaries take notes. Admiralties begin converting fleets from coal to oil. Energy becomes not just a product of commerce, but the lifeblood of empires. Rockefeller, for better or worse, helped open that door. But America has not forgotten the fight that brought down Standard Oil. In the wake of the 1911 decision, a new wave of progressive reforms sweeps the nation. Theodore Roosevelt's trust-busting crusade, though partially symbolic, sets the tone. The antitrust division gains sharper teeth. The idea that the government must regulate corporate power becomes part of the American creed. Universities teach courses on monopoly. Newspapers praise the government's courage. Children reading civics textbooks learn the story of Standard Oil as if it were a parable. And it is. A parable about ambition, about unchecked influence, about a single man's pursuit of order, and the chaos it ultimately produced. Ida Tarbell's work becomes standard reading for journalists. She speaks at universities, lectures in halls filled with eager young writers, and receives letters from readers thanking her for revealing what had long been hidden in shadows. Still, she never gloats. When asked during an interview whether she destroyed Rockefeller, she answers softly, "No, I revealed him. The truth did the rest." Her restraint only deepens her influence. Meanwhile, Rockefeller increasingly turns inward, not into darkness, but into philanthropy. He gives away more money each year than some nations earn. He builds foundations that attack public health crises from hookworm to yellow fever. He funds medical research that will one day cure diseases once considered unstoppable. He donates millions to universities, libraries, museums, social programs. One evening, a visitor asks him whether his charity is meant to atone for the sins of Standard Oil. Rockefeller studies him quietly. Then he says, "I do not believe wealth is given to be hoarded. I believe it is entrusted, and we must answer for how we use it." The visitor presses, "And do you answer for how you earned it?" Rockefeller's expression does not change, but something behind his eyes tightens just for a moment. He gives no further reply. Perhaps the question lingers in him. Perhaps it always has. Even in old age, he draws intense reactions. When he travels to a resort or to Florida for the winter, reporters follow, crowds gather, some cheer him, some stare coldly. Children sometimes offer flowers, adults sometimes offer accusations. One day outside a church, a woman confronts him directly. "You ruined my father's business." Rockefeller pauses. The congregation behind him falls silent. "I am sorry," he says gently, "truly." Does he mean it? Yes. Perhaps. The tone is quiet, sincere even. But sorrow does not undo consequences. It merely acknowledges them. The woman walks away without replying. Rockefeller stands for a long moment before continuing to his carriage. In 1914, on the eve of World War I, Rockefeller officially becomes the world's first billionaire. Not because of the company he built, but because of the companies born from its ashes. The pieces of Standard Oil, now separate, have multiplied in value. Oil demand, driven by automobiles, industry, and worsening global tensions, skyrockets. Nations no longer battle over coal mines but over oil fields. And in this shifting geopolitical landscape, the companies descended from Standard become central players. Rockefeller had sought to bring order to the oil world. He had succeeded so thoroughly that, even broken, his system persists. As news of his extraordinary wealth spreads, critics accuse him again of greed. But supporters argue that he has given away more money than any philanthropist in history. Some say he is a robber baron. Others say he is a saint. The truth, as always with great men, lies somewhere in between. At night in the quiet of his estate, Rockefeller sometimes reads his old ledgers, yellowed pages filled with neat columns, precise numbers, early dreams. The handwriting is young, determined, unshaken. He touches the pages as one touches old photographs of a self long gone. He wonders, just for a moment, whether that young man from Cleveland could have imagined all that would follow: the empire, the controversy, the scrutiny, the dismantling, the legacy. Perhaps he smiles. Perhaps he sighs. Perhaps he does both. Because the story of Standard Oil is not a simple rise and fall tale. It is a rise, then a fragmentation, then a rebirth in many forms. A story not of one giant falling, but of a giant dividing and seeding a forest of new giants. And as 3 draws to a close, the nation stands at the threshold of a new era, an era where fortunes are redirected toward the public good, where corporations face increasing scrutiny, and where a single family begins to reshape itself from industrial conquerors into philanthropic kings. But in that transformation, a new question emerges. Can charity wash away the shadow of power? Or does the shadow follow, no matter how much light one gives back to the world? From oil barons to philanthropic kings. The library is quiet enough that you can hear the page of a book turning from across the room. It is a new building, clean stone, tall windows, pillars that reach upward like lifted arms. Sunlight spills across rows of desks where young men and women bend over their studies. Shelves of books line the walls, the smell of ink and paper mingling with the faint polish of freshly varnished wood. Outside, carved into the stone, is a name that once stirred anger in the hearts of refinery men and small-town merchants. Rockefeller. Inside the University of Chicago, founded with his money, the name means something different. It means opportunity. A boy from a poor family in Iowa sits with a tattered coat around his shoulders, reading a chemistry text he could never have afforded in any other life. A girl from a small town in Indiana studies mathematics under a professor whose salary comes from a Rockefeller endowment. In the corridors, footsteps echo. Locked in those echoes are quiet hopes of leaving behind farms, factories, and dim shops for a life of the mind. They do not think of tank cars or rebate deals. They think of exams, lectures, the future. But this place exists because the oil baron decided to become something else. Or at least to appear as something else. The shift began slowly. Even as Standard Oil tightened its grip on the industry, Rockefeller, still in the prime of his power, was giving money away to his church, to missions, to small charities. His mother's lessons about thrift came with another, equally important one: generosity. Give, she would say, as you are blessed. As his fortune swelled beyond anything she could have imagined, that simple command grew complicated. He started with checks in modest amounts, then larger ones. Then he hired an advisor, Reverend Frederick T. Gates, a thoughtful, sharp-eyed man who saw both the potential and the danger in one man holding so much money. "You could scatter crumbs forever," Gates told him once, as they sat in a quiet room with financial statements spread across a table. "Or you could build structures that last, institutions, systems, not gifts." Systems. The word must have pleased Rockefeller. He had spent his life building systems out of chaos. "Then let us build them," he said. And they began. The University of Chicago rose out of that decision, a new kind of university in the Midwest, built not on centuries of tradition, but on a single man's determination to fund excellence. He poured millions into its endowment, guided by Gates and by a belief that education, properly directed, could shape the nation's future more gently than oil had. Then came the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in New York, where men in white coats walked bright corridors, glassware clinking softly in laboratories that smelled of alcohol, metal, and chemicals. Here, the battles were not over freight rates, but over bacteria and viruses. Microscopes replaced ledgers. Research grants replaced rebate agreements. In the American South, where poverty clung like dust to bare feet and hookworm disease left children listless and pale, Rockefeller's fortune funded massive public health campaigns. Doctors and nurses traveled to remote towns, setting up clinics under trees and in church basements, teaching hygiene, distributing medicine. Children who might have grown up weak and sickly instead found strength in their limbs, light in their eyes. A sharecropper wiping sweat from his brow might say, "Them Rockefeller people cured my boy." He might never know exactly who John D. was, beyond a rich northerner with a generous hand. To them, Rockefeller was not a monopoly. He was a distant benefactor. Yet in cities far from those clinics, not everyone viewed this transformation kindly. At a small college in the Northeast, a group of professors sat in a dim faculty lounge one evening, the air thick with pipe smoke. "They've offered us a Rockefeller grant," one said, tapping ash into a tray, "a handsome sum." Another professor frowned. "Tainted money," he muttered, "built on the backs of broken men, on secret deals." A third, older and more tired, spoke softly. "Our students need books. Our labs need equipment. Does the origin of the money matter more than the good it can do now?" Silence settled over the room. This was the question of an age. Can money be cleaned by its use? Can good deeds erase the stain of how wealth was made? Or does every brick in every Rockefeller building carry, invisible beneath its polished surface, the memory of smokestacks and crushed competitors? Rockefeller could not answer that for them. He could only keep giving. And he did. General Education Board, funding schools, especially in the impoverished rural South. Rockefeller Foundation, supporting research, arts, public health, international causes. Endowments for black colleges at a time when others ignored them. Support for scientific agriculture, modernizing farms that had barely changed since the Civil War. The checks flowed out in a steady stream. A schoolteacher in Georgia, a clinic in Mississippi, a research lab in New York, a scholar in Chicago. Each line item in a massive philanthropic ledger answered a need that might otherwise have gone unmet. Each line item also deepened the central paradox of Rockefeller's life. On Sundays, he still sat in church, Bible open, head bowed. He sang hymns in a thin but steady voice. Congregants sometimes watched him from the corners of their eyes. Some saw a saint of generosity. Others saw a man trying to buy back his soul. After one service, a young minister, emboldened by youth and moral fire, approached him. "Mr. Rockefeller," he began, "do you ever fear that your gifts are overshadowed by how your fortune was made?" Rockefeller studied him, the church's stained glass reflecting in his small, sharp eyes. "I fear God," he replied quietly, "and I try to be a good steward of what He has placed in my hands." The minister wanted to press further, to say that stewardship might have looked different in the refineries and rail yards of the 1870s, but the words caught in his throat. Rockefeller's frailty disarmed him. This was not the towering titan of the cartoons. This was an old man in a pew. And that, too, was part of the story. Men who change the world rarely live long enough to see their legacy clearly defined. They live long enough only to see it argued over. As Rockefeller's charity broadened, so did the family's role. His son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., walked a different path, more openly sensitive to public opinion, more cautious about business, more focused on philanthropy and moral causes. Where his father had thrived in the shadows of negotiation, the son was often on public stages, speaking for projects tied to housing reform, church work, and cultural institutions. Together, father and son began to turn the Rockefeller name from a symbol of monopoly into a symbol of giving. At least that was the attempt. Whether the transformation was genuine or strategic, or some tangled mix of both, depended on who you asked. In the end, the oil barons did not vanish. They simply stepped onto a new stage, crowned not with iron smokestacks and rail lines, but with libraries, laboratories, and concert halls. Yet even in this new light, the old shadows never fully disappeared. They waited at the edges of each dedication ceremony and ribbon cutting, like memories that refused to soften completely. Because the story of how the money was made could never be separated entirely from the way it was spent. And as the Rockefellers moved deeper into the world of foundations and philanthropy, another question drifted into focus. If you can shape industry with money, can you also shape society with it? And if so, how far should that power extend? Rockefeller's world shifts again near the turn of the century, not with the clang of machinery or the scratch of courtroom pens, but with the soft rustle of theater curtains, the quiet hum of museum halls, the low murmur of diplomats gathering under chandeliers. A new of influence begins, one that stretches beyond oil, beyond business, beyond the fierce battles of monopoly and reform. This time, the Rockefellers step into the realm of culture, science, and global affairs. And it is John D. Rockefeller Jr., the son, reserved, earnest, painfully conscious of the family's reputation, who becomes the architect of this transformation. He is not like his father. Where the elder Rockefeller is precise, angular, and confident in the righteousness of his every action, Jr. is gentle, self-doubting, almost fragile in his morality. He blushes easily. He fears scandal. He prays with a fervor that sometimes surprises even clergy, and he carries the burden of a name that has both built and bruised a nation. But he also carries something else, a conviction that the Rockefeller fortune must do good, visible, deliberate, enduring good. And he will spend his life trying to build a new narrative around that name. It begins with moral causes. Junior allies with reformers pushing to eliminate prostitution, child labor, and unsafe working conditions in factories. He supports campaigns for better housing in overcrowded cities. He attends endless meetings in cramped offices, where reformers argue over policy details under dim gas lamps. But his greatest test comes in 1914, in a coal field in Colorado owned by the Rockefeller-controlled Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. The Ludlow Massacre. Miners striking for better wages and living conditions face off against company guards and state militia. Tents are burned, shots are fired, families flee. When the smoke clears, women and children lie dead in the ashes. The nation erupts in fury. And the Rockefeller name, regardless of distance from the daily decisions in Colorado, sits at the center of the outrage. Junior is devastated. He appears before Congress, face pale, voice shaking, but honest. He admits mistakes. He pledges reform. He meets personally with miners and their families, visits the camps, listens to their grief. This moment becomes a turning point. For Junior, for the family, for the direction of their philanthropy. Junior realizes that giving money is not enough. They must rebuild trust. They must rebuild their identity. And so begins an era in which the Rockefellers turn their focus from industry to humanity. Across the next decades, their influence enters spaces where oil never flowed. Rockefeller Center begins as a bold urban vision, 12 towers rising from midtown Manhattan like a secular cathedral to commerce, art, and optimism. Junior insists on public art, gardens, sculptures, murals, beauty accessible to everyday people. During the Great Depression, the project employs tens of thousands, drawing praise as a symbol of hope in dark times. The Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, emerges with significant Rockefeller support, championing contemporary art, nurturing artists whose work might otherwise have been dismissed in a world still enamored with tradition. Colonial Williamsburg is restored with Rockefeller money, transforming a fading town into a living museum of American history. Junior walks its streets in silence during construction, studying each restored brick as if inspecting the soul of a nation. The Rockefeller Foundation expands globally, sending medical teams into Africa, Asia, and Latin America. It funds campaigns that virtually eradicate hookworm in the American South and yellow fever in parts of South America. It supports agricultural research that will one day lead to the Green Revolution. Everywhere they touch, transformation follows. Philanthropic kings indeed. But beneath the polished marble of foundations and the warm glow of cultural patronage, a persistent tension remains. How much influence should one family wield? In New York salons and newspaper columns, critics whisper, "The Rockefellers are remaking society in their own image." Is this charity or control? No one should decide so much for so many. One academic writes, "If money is power, then philanthropy is power wrapped in benevolence." It is an accusation wrapped in praise and fear. Because the scale of Rockefeller philanthropy is not measured in thousands or millions, but in whole institutions, whole philosophies, whole fields of science and art that grow directly from their funding. The Rockefellers do not simply give. They shape. Junior feels the weight of this. He worries constantly about transparency, about accountability, about the ethics of wealth. He agonizes over decisions, writes letters filled with earnest self-questioning, prays before board meetings. But he does not stop giving. He believes the country and the world need structures of stability. Just as his father once believed the oil industry needed order, Junior believes society itself requires architects who can see farther, plan longer, act boldly. The difference is that Junior is haunted by the cost of such architecture. His father never was. Meanwhile, the next generation of Rockefellers, David, Nelson, Lawrence, John III, Winthrop, grow up in a world where philanthropy is the family business as much as oil once was. Each develops a different passion: banking, conservation, global diplomacy, politics, the arts. Nelson Rockefeller, charismatic and ambitious, begins to move in political circles, dreaming of the presidency. He views government as a tool for sculpting society, a grand extension of the philanthropic instinct. He mingles with diplomats, presidents, foreign leaders. He collects modern art. He pushes for urban renewal. His influence ripples through New York City and beyond. David Rockefeller becomes a titan of international banking, his voice soft but commanding in the halls of Chase Manhattan Bank. He travels the world, meeting kings, presidents, sheiks. In him, the global reach of oil transforms into the global reach of finance. John D. Rockefeller III champions population studies, Asian cultural exchange, and humanitarian causes. He speaks of global stewardship decades before such phrases become common. Lawrence Rockefeller becomes a father of modern conservation, buying land and donating it to form national parks. His vision reshapes the American landscape, not with smokestacks, but with preserved wilderness. And through them all, the Rockefeller philanthropic machine continues to grow, granite foundations upon which countless institutions build their futures. Research labs, universities, art centers, international organizations, cities, entire scientific disciplines. The oil barons have not only remade industry, they have begun to remake civilization. Yet for all their giving, for all their influence, for all their attempts to shift their legacy from the grit of early capitalism to the polish of cultural patronage, the question lingers like a persistent echo. Does the origin of power ever truly fade? In every library built with Rockefeller funds, there are still people who remember the trust. In every museum hall, someone whispers Standard Oil under their breath. In every policy formed by a Rockefeller-backed commission, someone wonders whether philanthropy is simply another form of control. The debate grows louder as the 20th century advances. Is private philanthropic power undemocratic? Or does it fill the gaps that democracy cannot? Can a family whose influence once crushed competition now guide society with a gentler hand? Or is it all the same power, refined, redirected, but unchanged? These questions hang over the Rockefeller legacy like clouds partially obscuring the sun. And as the draws toward its end, we return to John D. Rockefeller himself, frail, aging, seated in a wicker chair on a veranda in the soft light of late afternoon. Children run across the lawn, laughter floats on the breeze, a servant brings tea. The old man watches, his expression unreadable, his mind perhaps drifting through decades of ambition, faith, controversy, and consequence. He built an empire. He built a fortune. He built institutions that will outlive him by centuries. But he could not build or rebuild the story people would tell about him. That story belongs to the world. And as America moves deeper into the 20th century, with new technologies rising, new political challenges emerging, and global tensions brewing, the question becomes, what does a dynasty built on oil and philanthropy become? When the world enters an age where influence is measured not only in money, but in ideas, diplomacy, and global power. Legacy, influence, and the invisible hand of a dynasty. The lights of Manhattan flicker on one by one, like stars being summoned from the pavement instead of the sky. From above, seen from a helicopter window or the 70th floor of a glass tower, the city is a living circuit board, streets glowing, rivers reflecting neon, bridges strung like necklaces of fire. Cars crawl in bright lines, signals flash, office floors buzz with late workers. Somewhere, a trading desk is still lit. Somewhere, a diplomat studies a speech. Somewhere, an art curator walks past a painting that would never have been on that wall without Rockefeller money. The oil wells of Pennsylvania are far away now. The muddy streets of early Cleveland feel like another century's dream. Yet in this glittering grid of the modern world, the Rockefeller presence is everywhere, less visible, more diffused, woven into the fabric of institutions rather than shouted from smokestacks. The dynasty has changed its posture. Where once it stood as a towering figure over a single industry, now it moves as a set of whispers inside many systems: finance, diplomacy, the arts, environmentalism, global aid, urban design. The name is no longer stamped across kerosene barrels. It's engraved discreetly on foundation plaques, carved in museum stone, written in the minutes of international conferences. In Lower Manhattan, at Chase Manhattan Bank, David Rockefeller, grandson of John D., sits at a polished table with a group of executives. He is refined, urbane, perfectly at ease in several languages. The room smells of paper, coffee, a faint edge of cologne, the quiet hum of conditioned air. On the wall behind him hangs a modern painting, sharp lines, bright colors, supported by a museum his family helped build. They talk of credit flows to Latin America, of trade balances, of the stability of currencies. Outside the window, the narrow streets of the financial district press close, the canyon of buildings funneling sound upward. Horns, footsteps, the low roar of a global market. David is not his grandfather. He does not pace refinery floors or inspect barrels. His world is one of balance sheets large enough to sway nations. When he travels, it is not to oil fields but to capitals: Paris, Tokyo, Riyadh, Brasilia, where presidents and prime ministers greet him by his first name. David, they say, as if speaking to an institution rather than a man. He listens more than he speaks, just as his grandfather did. He asks careful questions. He takes note of subtle shifts in tone, in posture, in policy. His power is not the crude leverage of monopoly, but the softer, stranger power of access. Doors open for him that remain shut to almost everyone else. In a quiet meeting room in some foreign ministry, a finance minister might lean forward and say, "We are considering an agreement with your bank, but we would also value your view. What do you think our country needs to grow?" And in that moment, as David offers suggestions about infrastructure, about stability, about long-term planning, the Rockefeller influence flows into the bloodstream of another nation's future, not as command, not as decree, as counsel. Yet counsel, when it comes from someone whose decisions can move billions, is never neutral. Across the river, at the United Nations headquarters, an institution the Rockefellers quite literally helped house by donating the land on which it stands, delegates from around the world glide across polished floors. Translation headsets crackle softly. Papers rustle. The air carries the low murmur of dozens of languages overlapping. Most visitors walking past the flags do not think about the fact that this building, this entire stage for global negotiation, stands on a gift from the Rockefeller family. They do not think of it as Rockefeller's UN. It is the world's institution. And yet the choice of where it stands, how it was conceived, and how it is funded and supported is not untouched by the hands of that dynasty. In another part of the city, in a gallery at the Museum of Modern Art, a young couple stands silently in front of a painting by Jackson Pollock or Mark Rothko, their faces illuminated by carefully placed lights. They read the small plaque beside the work, which mentions a donor's fund, a foundation, a gift. Behind those words, if you trace the lines far enough back, there is often a Rockefeller. From the forests of Wyoming to the skyscrapers of New York, from rice fields in Asia improved by Rockefeller-funded agricultural research, to vaccines created in laboratories built with Rockefeller grants, the the pattern repeats. The dynasty's influence has dissolved into structures, into systems, into habits of decision-making so old and established that they no longer feel like someone's choice. They feel like the way things simply are. The invisible hand of this dynasty is not a mythic force. It is a set of relationships, endowments, networks, and expectations. It lives in the comfort with which a minister accepts a Rockefeller phone call. It lives in the way a university builds a program because a foundation has offered funding. It lives in the culture of big philanthropy the Rockefellers helped normalize, private money steering public priorities. In the 1960s and 1970s, while television beams images of Vietnam, civil rights marches, and moon landings into living rooms, the Rockefellers moved through this era with a peculiar dual identity. To some, they are the responsible aristocrats of American capitalism, men who have learned that money is not just to be amassed, but distributed carefully. To others, they are a shadow cabinet, a family whose reach into banks, government, global organizations, and culture is too deep, too unaccountable, too entrenched. On talk shows and in newspaper essays, critics ask, who elected the Rockefellers? Should private wealth direct public destiny? Is philanthropy a kindness or a mask? The questions sting because they echo he old ones. Those same questions once surrounded Standard Oil's dominance. Now they surround its descendants' benevolence. The family hears these echoes. Some ignore them. Others, like David, keep files of critical articles and read them carefully, underlining passages that feel piercingly accurate. They cannot undo being who they are. They cannot unmake the structures their grandfather built. They can only decide how to live inside the legacy. In that choice, the day-by-day decisions of how to use influence that no longer announces itself with refinery smoke, but with foundation grants and quiet phone calls, the true shape of the Rockefeller legacy emerges. Not in oil, not in money, but in the question that haunts every move they make. How much power can one family hold, even indirectly, before it becomes too much? And who, if anyone, is allowed to answer that? The question echoes across decades, soft, persistent, impossible to silence. How much power can one family hold? The world of the 20th century becomes the testing ground for that question, a stage on which the Rockefeller dynasty moves with a mixture of caution, confidence, and ever-present scrutiny. It is the late 20th century. Skyscrapers have grown taller, their glass skins reflecting shifting clouds. Jet engines roar across continents. Satellites blink in the night sky. Economies are no longer local but global, tied together by invisible currents of capital, energy, information. The oil that once fueled lamps now fuels nations. And in this transformed landscape, the Rockefellers, though no longer industrial barons, continue to shape the unseen arteries of the world. In Midtown Manhattan, the sun rises over the polished stone plazas of Rockefeller Center, lighting the golden figure of Prometheus at its fountain. Tourists gather. Office workers stream into buildings whose lines and shadows were drawn by the ambitions of a family determined to reshape a city's heart. But inside the complex, beyond the shops and galleries, something more subtle unfolds. Committees meet in conference rooms. Boards discuss budgets, grants, research initiatives. Men and women of science, economics, and public policy sit at long tables under soft lights and debate the future. Many of these institutions, global health boards, international agricultural partnerships, cultural councils, exist because the Rockefellers seeded them. They are no longer run by the family, yet the family still sits in advisory roles, lending their voice, their networks, their gravity. The world listens not because the Rockefellers command, but because they guide. Influence without governance, power without office. A new form of dynasty. Across the ocean, In remote villages in Africa and Asia, health workers unload boxes stamped with logos of international foundations, foundations funded in part by the Rockefeller Endowment. Inside the boxes, vaccines, antibiotics, mosquito nets, medical kits. Children watch with wide eyes as white-coated workers set up temporary clinics. Mothers gather, babies cry. A nurse explains treatment routines in halting phrases learned for this journey. These efforts are not small. They alter the histories of entire regions. A disease eradicated here. A famine averted there. A generation strengthened by nutrition, education, or medicine. In these places, the Rockefeller name is not seen as a corporate shadow, but as a benevolent force, distant, yes, but undeniably real. A village elder in Uganda once told an interviewer, "We do not know this Rockefeller, but we know the hands that reach us. This is not the oil baron's world. This is something else, something he perhaps dreamed of, perhaps never imagined. A dynasty becoming global caretakers." And yet the duality persists. For every clinic built, a critic points to the system beneath it. For every museum endowed, a scholar questions the proportionality of influence. The conversation shifts from monopoly to capitalism, from antitrust to elite governance. A journalist in the 1980s writes, "The Rockefellers no longer dominate by force. They dominate by framing conversations." At a conference in Geneva, David Rockefeller stands at a podium, greeting diplomats and economists. His voice is measured, mellow, but his reach, through banking, policy institutes, and international councils, is immense. Some in the audience nod in admiration. Others narrow their eyes, wondering how a private citizen came to possess such access. A professor whispers to a colleague, "He speaks like a man who has the world on speed dial." And he does. Presidents greet him warmly. Prime ministers ask his advice. Foreign ministers invite him to private dinners. Not because he holds office, but because he commands trust, connection, continuity. This is the invisible hand, a whisper becoming a wind. Meanwhile, another branch of the family steps into American politics with boldness. Nelson Rockefeller becomes governor of New York, then vice president. His personality bursts like a spotlight, brash, animated, eager to build. He commissions highways, housing projects, arts initiatives, mental health reforms. He pushes policy forward in broad strokes, sweeping gestures. In him, the Rockefeller ambition moves into public office, no longer content to advise from the sidelines. But Nelson's ascent raises a new wave of questions. Should a member of a powerful dynasty hold such public authority? Is this democracy or dynasty by another route? When he dies, commentators describe him with words rarely applied to any one man. Visionary, flawed, formidable, relentless. But the legacy he leaves behind, urban renewal, reformed state institutions, carries the unmistakable imprint of Rockefeller philosophy. Order, structure, improvement, scale, always scale. As the century turns, the family's influence shifts once more, this time toward environmentalism, the natural world, the protection of what remains unspoiled. Lawrence Rockefeller becomes one of America's great conservationists. He stands in vast forests, breathing the scent of pine and wet soil, eyes focused on ridges he hopes to preserve. He funds national parks, buys land to protect it, donates thousands of acres. He walks trails, studies ecosystems, speaks softly to park rangers about biodiversity long before the word enters mainstream vocabulary. In him, the industrial wealth of the past transforms into a mission to preserve landscapes from the very forces that industrial wealth unleashed. Another paradox, another balancing act, another echo of history's irony. By the early 2000s, the Rockefellers are no longer America's largest fortune. New tech billionaires, hedge fund magnates, and global investors rise to eclipse them in raw financial power. The age of oil barons has become the age of Silicon Valley titans. Yet the Rockefellers remain unique, not because of money, but because of tradition. They built the blueprint that modern philanthropists follow. Family offices, endowments, multi-generational foundations, quiet influence inside global systems. The Rockefellers wrote the template that others now use. But the world has changed, and the family knows it. They begin investing in renewable energy. They divest from fossil fuels. They support climate research, sustainability projects, global conservation movements. In a move that shocks financial commentators, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund publicly announces that it will begin divesting from oil. A dynasty built on petroleum, now funding the transition away from it. Some call it hypocrisy. Some call it evolution. Some call it poetic justice. The truth lies somewhere in the seam between those words. Today, when people speak of the Rockefellers, they speak less of monopolies and more of museums, parks, hospitals, global policy councils, universities, and conservation efforts. But the question remains, persistent, insistent, as old as the first Standard Oil refinery fire in Cleveland. Can any family, no matter how benevolent, hold influence so long and so deeply without reshaping the world to its own image? And is that reshaping a gift or a warning? The answer depends on where you stand. If you stand in a library built with Rockefeller money, you may feel gratitude. If you stand in the ruins of an independent refinery, you may feel bitterness. If you stand in a forest preserved by Lawrence Rockefeller, you may feel wonder. If you stand in a policy meeting where David Rockefeller's ideas echo, you may feel unease. The legacy is not a single story. It is a tapestry, a dynasty of contradictions, builders and breakers, healers and disruptors, stewards and strategists, philanthropists and power brokers, invisible in some places, omnipresent in others. A family whose influence no longer marches with the clamor of industrial ambition, but drifts like a quiet wind through institutions so old and established that few remember who planted their foundations. And so we return in the final image to a quiet evening at Picantico Hills. The trees sway. The sky dims. The estate glows with a warm, golden hush. John D. Rockefeller, long gone now, exists only in memory, in photographs, in the shadows of systems he set in motion. His descendants move through a world he helped design, a world shaped by oil, finance, philanthropy, and global cooperation. The questions he raised about power and responsibility continue long after him. They continue today. They will continue for generations. Because the Rockefeller story is not merely the tale of a fortune. It is the tale of how influence evolves, how it survives collapse, adapts to scrutiny, and slips silently from one realm into another. A dynasty built in the smoke of refineries now lives on in the quiet rooms of institutions, in the pages of research papers, in the preserved forests, in the glint of skyscraper glass. Unseen but undeniable. Controversial yet essential. Broken yet unbroke. And a dynasty whose hand may no longer be visible, but whose fingerprints remain everywhere. Below is the cinematic closing reflection, written in the same tone and narrative rhythm as the rest of the documentary. It serves as the final moment, the camera pulling back, the lights dimming, the audience left with something to carry long after the credits. The night settles over New York like a velvet curtain, soft and immense. Far below, the avenues hum with the constant heartbeat of the modern age, traffic lights blinking like measured breaths, skyscraper windows shimmering in endless constellations, crowds moving through their own private orbits. The world has grown louder, faster, more electric than anything the first Rockefeller could have imagined. And yet, in the quiet spaces between those lights, something older lingers. A lineage, a legacy, a set of decisions made long before the digital age, still rippling through the present like distant waves. From the oil fields of Pennsylvania to the galleries of Manhattan, from refinery smoke to cathedral-like libraries, from courtroom battles to philanthropic blueprints copied by 1,000 successors, the Rockefeller story is stitched deep into the fabric of the nation. Not neatly, not cleanly, not without wounds or wonders, but undeniably. History rarely gives simple verdicts. It leaves us instead with mirrors, asking not whether a family was good or bad, but what they reveal about the world that shaped them and the world they helped create. John D. Rockefeller believed in order. His descendants believed in stewardship. The nation believed in questioning them both. And somewhere in that triangle of ambition, conscience, and scrutiny, the story of modern capitalism took form. Even now, as we face a future of shifting climates, rising technologies, and global uncertainty, the questions born from this dynasty echo louder than ever. What does it mean to wield power responsibly? Who decides how wealth should reshape the world? And how do we measure a legacy? By the empire built or by the world left behind? The camera pulls back one final time. Across the skyline, the city glitters, alive, restless, endlessly reinventing itself. The wind moves through the canyons of steel. Somewhere, footsteps echo in a museum hallway. A child opens a book in a Rockefeller-funded library. A forest protected by their gifts rustles in the dusk. Empires rise. Empires fall. But influence, true influence, does not vanish. It transforms. And in that transformation, the story continues, carried forward not by one man, nor one family, but by the countless hands touched, shaped, challenged, or inspired by the legacy they left behind. A legacy written in oil, refined in philanthropy, etched into the quiet machinery of modern life, and now passed on to us. The lights fade. The world holds its breath.